I'd like to begin by welcoming all of you, wishing you all good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good early morning, whatever time of day it is for you, wherever you are. And we will begin this morning by going for refuge and rousing bodhicitta. So please think about the meaning of the words as you recite them, as we recite them together. O sanje chudan sogi chonam la chancho bardo dane chapsum che dagi chunyen gi pesanam gi jola penjir sanje jobar sho sanje chudan sogi chonam la chancho bardo dane chapsum che dagi chunyen gi pesanam gi rola penjir sanje robar sho sanje chedang sogi chonam la chancho bardo dane chapsum che dagi chunyen gi pesanam gi dola penjir sanje robar sho until enlightenment I go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and the sublime Sangha. By the merit of my listening to the Dharma, may I reach Buddhahood to benefit beings. Until enlightenment I go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and the sublime Sangha. By the merit of my listening to the Dharma, may I reach Buddhahood to benefit beings. Until enlightenment I go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and the sublime Sangha. By the merit of my listening to the Dharma, may I reach Buddhahood to benefit beings. Semjen tamje dewa tan dewe judan dembro juji donga da donga ji judan rawa juji donga mebe dewa tamban dan min rawa juji nere chadan nitan rawa danyon shembola nebra juji. May all sentient beings be happy and have the causes of happiness. May they be free of suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be parted from the highest joy, free of suffering. May they dwell in the great equanimity, free of attachment or hatred for those near or far. In the Dharma Expanse Palace of Akanishta is the essence of all Buddhas of the three times who shows me directly my mind is Dharmakaya. I prostrate to the glorious exalted Guru. Please bless me and all beings that our minds may become the Dharma. Please bless us that the Dharma may become the path. Please bless us that the path dispel confusion. Please bless us that confusion arise as wisdom. And now please think to yourselves that we need to bring all of our mothers, all sentient beings throughout space, to the state of completely perfect Buddhahood. And in order to reach that state of complete and lasting happiness, we ourselves have to reach that state first. And in order to reach the state of Buddhahood ourselves, we need to meditate. To meditate, we need to contemplate. And to contemplate, we need to study. And so we are think to yourselves that we are studying now with this intention of bodhicitta. The Dharma that we are studying is the treasury of Abhidharma by Vasubandhu. And of the 8 chapters of the treasury, we are discussing the 7th chapter, the teachings on wisdom. And the teachings on wisdom have 3 parts, or 4 parts, sorry. The 10 knowings, the explanation of possession, how the knowings are attained, and the qualities of the knowing. And so we're speaking about the first, the qualities of the knowings, or the knowings. And so this has 3 topics: the distinctions between forbearances, knowings, and views, which we discussed 2 sessions ago; identifying the 10 knowings, we discussed yesterday; and examining distinctions among the knowings, which we began yesterday. And so that is the portion that we are discussing. And where is that? Oh, where did it go? Yes, the distinctions between the knowings has 4 topics: the distinctions of the 10 knowings, the distinctions of antidotes, the distinctions of aspect, and explaining other distinctions. And so we have come to the 3rd of these. The first 2 we covered yesterday. So today we will be talking about the differences of aspect. And this has 2 topics: the aspects of each knowing and the essence of each aspect. Now, generally, when we're talking about aspects in the context of the treasury of Abhidharma, generally, not always, but generally what we're talking about are the 16 aspects of the 4 noble truths: the impermanent, suffering, empty, selfless, and so forth. These are the 16 aspects. So the question is, well, what do we mean by the word aspect? And what is kind of the range of meanings of the words? Well, first of all, we have the English word aspect, which has kind of a bunch of different meanings. And a bunch of different usages. And I think sometimes we kind of lose track of, when we use the word aspect here in this type of context, we sometimes lose track of what we're actually meaning. So what we're actually meaning is how something appears to your mind. The way it appears, or it's either the way it appears or, well, I guess the way it appears is actually a good translation of it in general, because, or a good way of explaining it, because that's also a little bit ambiguous. There are different ways that you can talk, when you say the way things appear, it can mean different things. So fundamentally, this is from a Sanskrit word called akara. It's a little bit, you all might know about the term from akara, which is from like Padmakara or Dharmakara, and isn't like the place that you arise from. But here, this is different. There's a long 2 long as, akara. So akara means like the image or the form or the figure of something. How it looks. Basically, we're saying, how does it look? In Tibetan, this is translated by the word nampa. In colloquial Tibetan, when we're talking about nampa, what we can mean is just how you look, or we can even talk about putting on makeup as nampa gyat. Right? So it's basically changing how you look. So we're talking about how things look to us. So we'll come to this a little bit later, but there are different usages of the word nampa in the different vehicles. So here in the Great Exposition, to jump ahead a little bit, basically we're saying it's the prajna that kind of discerns how something really is. So when you're seeing something that is the truth of suffering, then you're seeing it as impermanent. You're seeing it as empty, selfless, as suffering. You're seeing it as that, and that seeing it that way is prajna. So it's said to be prajna in the Great Exposition School. The Sutra school sees a little bit different. It doesn't go into detail in the treasury or in the auto commentary or in the Ashomitra, but basically in the Sutra school, it is like the way things, or the method, the way that things appear to the mind. When we get into the teachings of the Great Vehicle, and particularly in the teachings of the Yogacara tradition, then it's used in particularly in a slightly different way. It's used to mean what we would call like the cognitive image in contemporary neuroscience when they talk about a cognitive image. What is that? Well, that is what we would call an image or an aspect, nampa. So they're kind of different usages. It kind of has a gray area. So in that context of speaking about it in terms of the teachings of Dharmakirti and Dignaga and that and the tradition that came out of that, I think it's reasonable to actually just use the word image to be to kind of fit in with the current usage in English. But here in the Abhidharma, it's a little bit, and this is something that I've thought, begun to kind of understand with the influence of other scholars and so forth. Of course, I didn't think it up. There's a scholar named John Dunn who is a great expert on Dharmakirti, and he uses the term image for these nampa or akara. So that's in the context of Dharmakirti. It's like the kirti, it's the cognitive image. And actually, when we have a cognitive image of an object, we actually have two images. You have the image of the object, but we also feel like there's something looking at it. So that we would say that there are kind of two aspects. There's kind of the apprehending aspect, kind of like the perceiver, you might say. Not always perceiving, because it can be thought, which is not perception. And then you have the apprehended aspect, the image of the object as it appears in your mind. So you can say there's these two images that appear in your mind, the apprehending and the apprehended. But that's, so when you come to, now that, but still, in most of the translations up to now, people have been translating image pretty universally as aspect. Or not, they've been translating nampa pretty universally as aspect. And so it's important to understand what we're talking about is it's how things appear to you, how things they look. So that's what we mean by the word aspect. So when we're talking about the aspects of the Four Noble Truths, the nobles look at the truth of suffering and they see it as empty, or as impermanent, suffering, empty, and selfless. They see the origin as the cause, origin, production, and conditions, and so forth. They see the 16 different aspects. They see it in these ways. So that's basically what we mean by the term aspect, how things appear to our mind. And so each cognition has an aspect, how it sees things. Like, if you think about it, it makes sense. You can look at, I don't know, you look at a bowl of vanilla ice cream and you might have a certain aspect. It has an image, right? There's something that happens. You look at a person, there's an image. Like how you see them, what you see them as. So that's what we're speaking about in terms of the aspects. So the reason why we're talking about them here is that with the 10 different knowings, then they have different ways of different aspects that they can take. Because they're either defiled or undefiled, they're looking at different things, and so they're different. They can have different aspects. So that is the topic that we are beginning with today. And so to resume with the actual text, we're here at the distinctions of aspect, and this has two topics: the aspect of each knowing and the essence of each aspect. So the aspects of each knowing. This means, what aspects can they see among the 16 aspects? Which ones can they see an object with? And what is the nature of each aspect? And so here with the distinctions of with the aspects of each knowing, there are 5 topics. Through which aspects Dharma knowing and subsequent knowing engage. In other words, a cognition engages, or when you perceive it, or when you apprehend an object, it's like the condition or the cognition engages it through an aspect. So what are the aspects that it engages? The Dharma knowing and subsequent knowing engage the object. And this aspect then for the same for relative knowing. Then the knowings of the 4 truths. And the knowing others' minds, or telepathy, and through which aspects knowing of extinction and non-arising engage, the last 2 knowings. And so these are all the 10 knowings. So the first is the aspects the Dharma knowing and subsequent knowing engage. The subsequent Dharma knowings have 16 aspects. In other words, they can engage the objects in the 16 different ways, the 16 different aspects of the Four Noble Truths. So among those 10 knowings, the subsequent and Dharma knowings have 16 aspects, because the Four Truths each have 4 aspects, and the 16 aspects will be explained below. So basically, with all, this is impermanent suffering and so forth up to 16. And of course, I'm only reciting the ones about, I habitually recite the ones about suffering. I suppose I could go and say, oh, oops, sorry, what did I do there? I could be talking about the, what do you say? Path reasoning, establishing, and deliverance, but it's just easier to use the ones for desire or for suffering. So that's the subsequent Dharma knowings. They have the 16 aspects. Relative knowing here is next. Relative knowing is like or different too. So relative knowing can either engage through the 16 aspects, or it can engage through differently. So relative knowing is like Dharma and subsequent knowing with 16 aspects on warmth, peak, and so forth. In other words, when you are on the path of joining and training, you're meditating on the 4 foundations of mindfulness. You're meditating that all phenomena are empty, are impermanent, suffering, empty, and selfless, and so forth. And so that's when you're meditating on the path of joining. Or it can be different. You can have aspects of revulsion, the aspects of the in-breath and out-breath, aspects of loving kindness, and so forth. And so the reason why you can have this is because that is relative knowing, perceives the specific and general characteristics of all dharmas. In other words, the 16 aspects are like general characteristics. In fact, sometimes these 16 aspects are also called the 16 characteristics. So those are like general characteristics. The specific characteristics are like, as we discussed yesterday, the kind of the fundamental things that you're thinking about. When you're thinking about the in and out breath, you're kind of feeling each moment or experiencing each moment as it goes in and out. So the phrase "and so forth" here in the commentary includes things which are not specific or general aspects, including commands such as make, drink, go, or things such as vases and blankets, right? So that's basically anything. So it can have lots of different aspects. Then there are the knowings of the Four Truths. They have 4 from aspects of their truths. So they refers to the knowings of the Four Truths, as it says in the commentary. The knowings of the Four Truths, have 4 aspects each. In other words, there are 4 aspects for each of the truth, from the aspects of their own individual truths. So the knowing of suffering only knows the 4 aspects of suffering. Knowing of origin knows the 4 aspects of origin. Knowing of cessation knows the 4 aspects of cessation. And knowing of path knowing knows the 4 aspects of the path. So that's, I think, fairly straightforward. And then knowing others' minds, or telepathy. And there are 2 points here. There are 2 points because the stainless and the undefiled engage slightly differently. Undefiled knowing others' minds is like that too. It's like that is the truth of the path. So undefiled knowing others' minds, or undefiled telepathy, is like that knowing path too, and having the aspects of the truth of path as its aspects. In other words, it will see things as path, reasoning, establishing, and deliverance, because it is also knowing of the truth of the path. That's kind of its nature. And then there is defiled telepathy, how the stained telepathic cognitions. For the stained, the aspects are the specifics of the known. When we're talking about stained, what we're talking about is an ordinary individual who achieves the dhyanas and is able to read others' minds. Or we are talking about a being in the bardo who is able to read others' minds, or we're talking about someone who, like a god, who has the ability from birth. So that is the defiled telepathy. For stained, the aspects are the specifics of the known. In other words, it's looking at the specific characteristics of the known object. The sphere of each is a single substance. So it's either going to know the primary mind, or it's going to know a mental factor. So for stained knowing of minds, the perceived aspects are the specific characteristics of the known, the mind and mental factors. It's not going to know form because it's knowing minds. It's knowing others' minds. You can know people's forms by, either seeing or touching them somehow, somewhat. But for minds, you have to use telepathy. So both the stained and the stainless, so whether it's defiled or undefiled, cannot perceive the two substances of mind and mental factors simultaneously. In other words, you can see either the aggregate of consciousness, the primary consciousness there, or you can see a mental factor. And here it's not clear in this commentary. It's clear in Yashomitra. If you know feeling, you aren't knowing conception, and you aren't knowing any of the other mental factors. If you're knowing conception, then you're not knowing feeling, and you're not knowing any of the other mental factors. And if you're knowing, if you're knowing the prajna, or if you're knowing the, any of the other mental factors, then you're not at the same time knowing any of the other mental factors. You know one mental factor or the one substance of the consciousness at once, according to Yashomitra. So for that reason, the sphere of each is a single substance, as it says. So through which aspects knowing of extinction and non-arising engage? In other words, what aspects do they see things through? The remaining, that is, knowing extinction and knowing non-arising, possess 14 aspects, except for empty and for selfless. So basically it sees through all of the 16 aspects, except for these two of the truth of suffering, empty and selflessness, as it explains in the commentary. The two remaining from the 8 previously explained, that is, knowing extinction and knowing non-arising, possess 14 aspects of impermanence and so forth, excepting empty and selfless. So why is it that they don't perceive empty and selfless? They do not have the aspects of empty or selflessness or selfless, because these knowings designate the self in conventional labels, saying, I have extinguished rebirth. I shall know no existence beyond this one. But when you are however, when meditating on the empty and selfless, such conventional designations become illogical through the power of that meditation. In other words, you're looking and you're seeing that there's nothing to give a conventional designation to. It's not there. How can you know a self that's not there? I know the self completely, but there's nothing to know. You can't say it, right? I have known the self completely. That means that there is a self to know. There's no self to know. There is no more to know about the self. Well, that implies that the self exists. So you can't use those two different, when you have achieved enlightenment, then there's no more empty or selfless, or no more engaging the object through those two aspects. So now we come to the essence of each aspect, and this has 4 points. Examining whether the undefiled has specific characteristics as aspects, and proving that 16 aspects are substantial, the essence of the aspect, and the distinction between perceiver and perceived. So examining whether the undefiled has specific characteristics as has aspects, and this has 2 points. In other words, what we're saying, when we have undefiled cognition, are they only seeing the general characteristics of impermanent, selfless, and so forth, or are they actually engaging with the aspects of the specific characteristics? So, unstained, no more than the own tradition is, that is the Kashmiri Vaibhashika, or Great Exposition tradition, says unstained, no more than 16 aspects. Do the undefiled knowings have self-characteristics or specific characteristics as aspects, you ask? The Kashmiris propose that the unstained have no more than the 16 aspects of impermanence, and so on. So when you are when you have the unstained cognition, you only have those 16 aspects of impermanent, empty, and so forth. Now there's another tradition, and this is the Aparantaka tradition, but others say there are from the treatise. But the others, that is the Aparantakas, say that there are also aspects of specific characteristics. And the reason, they say, comes from the treatise, the Dhyanaprasthana, which is one of the 7 treatises of Abhidharma. That was the basis for the Great Exposition. Does the mind that does not know possess dharmas, you ask? It knows. In terms of being produced logically It knows impermanence, suffering, empty, selfless, cause, origin, fully arising condition, that this is the place, or perhaps to translate it differently, that this has a place and that this has a basis. I looked at it when I was looking again this morning. It seems like this needs to be revised. This is another of the points in the translation that needs revision. When we say this has a place, what we're saying is that it has the characteristics. It has its own characters. And we're looking at the specific characters. That this has a basis means that it has causes. So this is what they say. So this is said in the Aparantaka tradition. Well, the Great Exposition replies, so, well, wait a minute. It doesn't list these anywhere else in the sutra, and it doesn't really even there say that it's specifically talking about these 16 aspects, so this doesn't make sense, according to the Great Exposition tradition. So this is just kind of one of the many debates that you see between the different traditions within the Abhidharma. So proving that the 16 aspects are substantial. The next topic, it says, in substance, there are 16 aspects. The Aparantakas say that in substance, there are the 4 aspects of suffering, and 1 each for origin, cessation, and path, for a total of 7 aspects. And the others are synonyms. So what they're saying is that when you have the 4 aspects of the truth of suffering, impermanence, suffering, empty, and selfless, these are each substantially separate. But when you look at like the 4 of the cause of origin, production, and condition, these 4 are actually all synonyms for the same thing. So they're not substantially different. Therefore, there's only that one that we're going to call origin. Similarly with cessation and with path, each of their 4 aspects, well, you can look at them as 4, but they're not substantially different, they say. So there are only 7 substantially substantially existent ones, they say. But the Great Exposition proposes that there are 16 substantially established aspects. And the reason why there are 16 substantially established aspects is because the Buddha, when the Buddha talked about them in the sutras, he taught them with kind of these 16 different ways of looking at them. And each of the aspects gives kind of a different understanding of like the truths of that. And they're kind of different. There are different ways of looking at things. So they say there are 16 substantially different aspects. So what are these 16 substantial aspects, other than just the names? You've been hearing me say, oh, impermanent, suffering, empty, and selfless for weeks now. So what actually do we mean by saying that? And this is a really important topic, because to really understand the 4 noble truths, we have to understand really what the 4 aspects of each truth mean. So the aspects of the truth of suffering are as follows. Because it depends on conditions, impermanent. So the first of the 4 characteristics of the truth of suffering is impermanent. Why is it impermanent? It's because it depends on conditions. So what this means is that it's dependent on conditions, and because it depends on conditions, it arises. And because it arises, it therefore must be impermanent. If it's permanent, it can't arise. And if it's permanent, because it doesn't arise, it doesn't need to depend upon conditions. So arising depends upon conditions, and therefore arising and impermanence are essentially synonymous. I'm not sure if they're synonymous in terms of the words, but they have the same meaning. Anything that is impermanent arises, and anything that arises is impermanent. That's impermanence. And this is an important aspect. I think when we talk about impermanence, we often end up talking about it as saying that there is no single, no single autonomous, established, permanent self, eternal soul. We think of it, we're thinking about the eternal soul as what we mean by what we're talking about here. But we can also think about it on the shorter level. I think that many of us, especially those who come from like a secular background, if we don't accept the Christian tradition coming in, then we have more of, basically the Chepratawa, the nihilistic view of thinking that at the end of our lifetimes we're dead and that's done. That's kind of, in the secular tradition, that's kind of the way people think and talk. And those are very common in our culture. And so you might think that therefore, people who have this view have an understanding of impermanence. But you have to actually look at it. When we're talking about impermanence, it's not just saying that it arises and perishes in terms of some continuum that arises and perishes. It's like the continuum of an individual being that arises at the moment of conception, or some people might say some weeks into the pregnancy, and ends at the moment of death. It's actually, because if you're thinking about things in terms of enduring over a period of time, then you aren't understanding it. And even on a sort of simpler, more day-to-day level, instead of looking at the continuum of a being, you can actually look at the objects that you have. You have a cup, and you know that the cup was made. And you know that someday that cup is going to break and be destroyed. But in the middle, you think it's the same cup. You think that that cup endures for a period of time. So you're seeing kind of like part of the impermanence, but you're not really seeing it. Because the impermanence is that it depends upon each moment of that cup, depends upon a condition to arise. That condition being the previous moment of the previous moments of various things. Actually, it's not even the cup. The cup is like the relative truth. You've got the atoms that make the cup up. And those atoms arise and perish in each moment. So if we look at it in the traditional explanation, you would see that, if it's made up of the atoms of earth, water, fire, air, form, scent, taste, and touch, all kind of conglomerated together, and enough of them conglomerated together that you've got billions conglomerated together to make a form of a cup. Now, each of those atoms arises, abides, and perishes all in in each infinitesimal moment, right? Arising and perishing. And so the cup is made up of things that are arising and perishing in every moment. Now, each moment of that, each moment is similar enough to the moment that preceded, or the moments that preceded it, and similar enough to the moments that follow it. Like there's this likeness that continues in the continuum. So we mistake it as saying it's the same cup. If you have the cup, it's sitting on the table. If you say to someone, and the cup is sitting on the table, you come back and you look at it an hour later and it's still sitting on the table, you would say the cup is still sitting on the table. You wouldn't think it's a new cup. And relatively, that's how we function. But to understand it, it's like producing, it being produced, or it's arising. There are conditions arising and perishing in every single instant. This is really important to understand. We also have to see the same thing with our body. We think of our body as enduring over time. But actually, each moment of the body is changing. The atoms, the billions upon billions of atoms in the body are changing and changing and moving, and all the configurations are changing in every single instant. If you just look at it, if you studied any biology in high school, you get an idea of what's happening in your body in a microscopic level. It's just always changing. And every single instant, the blood is flowing, the molecules are moving around. And how does it flow? It's because it arises and perishes in every moment, every tiny, short infinitesimal instant. So these are, that's the impermanence. It's really important to understand that we're not just talking about the permanence of a long continuum. We're also talking about the idea that things endure for a finite period of time. Even that is a misunderstanding of the true relative impermanence. So there's an interesting book by, I didn't even think about this, just came right to mind, and I don't a great Burmese meditator from the 1950s, 60s, and 70s who later came to the West, whose name is escaping me. But there's a book that he wrote actually while he was still in Burma in the 1950s that I saw once And he talked about how people would meditate and then have the experience where they'd see like things constantly. They'd have the experience of seeing the whole world shifting and coming in and out and in and out and in and out. That's seeing the subtle impermanence. So if we meditate, if we follow the instructions on meditating on subtle impermanence, it's something that we too could do. Although we don't emphasize that practice in the Tibetan tradition, it's something that we can do, if frankly, if ordinary Burmese people can do it, we're all equal in nature. So ordinary Western people can do it. Ordinary Chinese people do it. Ordinary indigenous people all over the world. Anyone can do it. It doesn't matter. We can all do the meditation if we get the instruction. So that's just the nature of things, seeing the subtle, impermanent nature of things. So that's what we mean by the first of the first of the four characteristics, impermanent. The second is because it is inherently harmful. In other words, it's painful. It's suffering. That's the exception. Just the nature. They're inherently suffering, inherently painful, harmful. As it is incompatible with the view of mine, it is empty. You can't think of it as mine, so therefore it is empty. As it is incompatible with viewing me, if you look at the five aggregates and you can't find anything that is me in them, then it must be selflessness. Incompatible means that it's exclusive of it. There's just no way that it can both be mine and be the five aggregates. There's no way that it can be me and be the five aggregates. There's just no way that could be. So those are the four aspects of the truth of suffering. And so now we've come to the aspects of the truth of origin. So the aspects of the truth of origin are, in the manner of a seed, cause. So a seed actually, when you have a seed, the seed comes a long time before. So this is saying like the cause is something that's kind of more remote in time, distant in time. You plant the seed in the spring or even in the fall for some plants. And then the plant comes up some time later in the manner of arising, origin. Now, this is one where we're using the English word that is commonly used for this. The Sanskrit word, samudaya, and the Tibetan origin are more like exactly what it really comes right out of. So here we're saying in the manner of arising, we're saying, what is it coming directly out of at that, the more proximate cause. So the cause is talking about the remote, and the origin is talking about the proximate, the one that's right at that time. In the manner of connection, production. So the manner of connection, what this means is that you have the seed. Then the seed grows a shoot. That shoot becomes a stalk. The stalks then grow leaves. Then they grow flowers, and then they grow fruit. So you've got this connection of one thing leading to the next, leading to the next, leading to the next, and so that is production. And so the meaning of manifestly establishing means condition. So what this means is that condition means that there are lots of things that work together. You can't have, things don't arise from just one thing. As it says in chapter 2, there is nothing that arises from just one cause. Everything needs lots of conditions to come together. In our example of the seed going through to produce a shoot, and shoot, stalk, leaves, flowers, and fruit. Well, you also have to have the earth, the fertilizer, the water, the sunlight, and all sorts of, and the air and all the other conditions coming together in order to get the result, the fruit. So you have to have conditions. So that's the meaning of the four aspects of the truth of origin. The aspects of the truth of cessation are, because the aggregates have been destroyed, and actually it should be the aggregates have perished. Cessation. The aggregates, and particularly the aggregates of suffering, have perished. They've ceased. So that is cessation. Or you can also say it's the aggregates of the causes, karma, and afflictions have ceased. I think actually that's what Yashomitra says. Because the three fires are pacified, it is peace. The three fires of greed, hatred, and delusion have gone out. They've been pacified. In English, we wouldn't normally say pacified. I'm too literal in my translations. We're all too literal in our translations sometimes. I'm going to complain about literality and translations in just a moment. And here I am being literal. Pacified, peace. Because there is no hostility sublime, there's nothing that's hostile, nothing that can harm, no karma and afflictions, no aggregates of suffering that can harm you. So it is harm cessation, so it is sublime. Because it is free of all faults, and all faults here specifically means karma and afflictions, emancipation. So here's where I'm going to complain about overly literal translation. We often see this translated in English as definite emergence. Now, actually, there's a good reason why the people translate it like this. And the reason is that when translating from Sanskrit into Tibetan, the Tibetan translators, and deciding their terminology, were often very literal to the Sanskrit etymology or the descriptions of the etymologies of the word. And so they translated the Sanskrit word for this as Nyepar Jungwa. So Nyepar, they say, oh, that means definite. And Jungwa means you've emerged. So it's definitely emerged. And so people translate it in this way. Now in Tibetan, in the 8th century Tibetan, when there wasn't like a really established Tibetan literary or philosophical language, I think that made a lot of sense. But when you talk about it in English now, it's not always very communicative. And there are other ways to translate as well. I mean, like, for example, if you look at the Chinese scriptures, in the Chinese translations, there are some words that they actually just took the Sanskrit word and just transliterated it in, or just brought it into Chinese. And so like, like Chan, which is for dhyana, then became pronounced in Chinese as Chan, which then became the Japanese Zen. For the Sanskrit word samadhi, they just say samodhi. So they just translated the word. But some words, they actually translated the meaning. And I think our English term, like we have the hungry ghosts, that comes from a Chinese translation, actually, I think. And so that's another good way to translate. Now, I'm not gonna, so you have to think about what is the best way to translate. And my personal feeling is that it's good to use terms that are going to communicate meaning to people. Or if you can't come up with one that's going to communicate meaning, then you at least come up with one that's not going to communicate the wrong meaning. So emancipation, what the Sanskrit word refers to, irrespective of its etymology, it refers to being freed. You are freed of the faults. They're gone. You've escaped. So emancipation. It's a synonym for liberation. Now, another translation thing here is that this word Nyepar Jungwa refers to the result of this, but it is also used in the phrase Nyejungi Sampa, Nyepar Jungwe Sampa. Now, the Nyepar Jungwe Sampa means the intention for the wish or the intention to achieve this emancipation. In English, and then it is, what do we say? And then, because it's the Ngejungi Sampa is such a long word, they actually just shorten it and they just say Ngejung, Ngejung, Ngejung in Tibetan, meaning Ngejungi Sampa. But because people hear the term Ngejung as a renunciation so frequently, and they don't hear this term Nyepar Jungwa as an emancipation very often, then they just assume that every time they see the word Ngejung or its slightly longer form Nyepar Jungwa, that it must mean renunciation, but it doesn't. So when you're translating, you have to be careful. You have to look and see, well, what are we actually talking about? Are we talking about renunciation, the intention to become emancipated, or are we talking about emancipation? So those of you who are working at a little bit of translation, you should keep this in mind. You see the word Ngejung in Tibetan, it does not automatically mean revulsion in English. You got to be careful. Otherwise, you can really, make some basically, you can make a mistake. You're getting the wrong meaning. So That's a bit of a digression about the word. So back to the aspects of the truth of path. The aspects of the truth of path are through the meaning of going path. You're going somewhere. This is the way that takes you there. You're traveling somewhere. Actually, that might be a better translation here, through the meaning of traveling. You're traveling. What do you travel on? You travel on a path. Where are you traveling to? Nirvana. Because it has proof. It's reasoning. Or you could also translate this word as logical. I'm sort of considering that might be a better way of saying it. It's logical. It's tenable. You can say, yes, this really is how it is. Through the meaning of completely accomplishing, it is called accomplishing. Excuse me for a moment here. I just want to check and make sure I say the right one here. I'm looking at my other notes. Oh, where are we? Oh, that's right. I needed to look at the other one. I just want to make sure that I'm not giving you any right. Because it truly, because you can use it, because through this you truly accomplish nirvana, it is accomplishing. That is why it is called accomplishing. So this is by which we accomplish, so it's called accomplishing. And because it makes one transcend utterly and completely, you transcend all the faults, all the samsara, everything utterly and completely, it's deliverance. So this is what gives you deliverance, right? Now, actually, an interesting, and since I started on the translation thing, this is from you've got the word that I was just speaking about, Nyepa that I translate as emancipation. That is actually the past tense. Here of the verb, and the present tense of the word is Nyepa. So the Nyepa, that refers to what makes you emancipated. Well, I thought about briefly saying something like emancipator, but it just didn't sound right. So deliverance sounds better in English. Conveys the meaning more. So I was a little bit freer in the choice of terms there. So those are the 16 aspects, and I'm afraid that I might have clouded the meaning by talking about words. The quote that Rinpoche has said once, but I've always remembered, is that the leaves of words conceal the trunk of meaning. When we talk about things too much. Now, there's another way to think about that. So we can also think about these 16 aspects. And so to kind of maybe go through and speak about it from this other perspective, it's also in the auto commentary from the, what do we say? It's from the auto commentary. It's an alternate explanation of the 16. But I thought these 16 are so important that it's really actually good for us to kind of look at them in a different way. So the first is the aspect of impermanence. So why is it impermanent? Because it is not forever. Because it is not forever, impermanence. It does not last. It's not forever, so it is impermanence. Because it is like a burden, it is suffering. A burden or a load. It's like if you have a load that you are carrying. It is painful. If you've ever carried a pack if you've ever carried a heavy computer, you don't think it's heavy when you first put it on, but when you've walked, the length of an airport, it gets pretty heavy, right? That pack, that heavy burden that we're carrying, the burden of suffering, that's unlike a pack. We can't ever fully unburden ourselves of it. Although we're in kind of a break now, we don't really notice how heavy the suffering is when we're here in really a very comfortable existence, probably one of the best human existences you could materially have historically in our developed society. But it is like a burden. So because it is like a burden, it is suffering. Because it is free of any person inside, it is empty. So there's no one inside the five aggregates who controls them. To use the phrase commonly used in Western philosophy, there is no ghost in a machine. So it is empty. There's no one there to say, this is mine. Because it cannot fulfill your wishes, it is selfless. There is no self. If there were a self, If form were the self, then form would do what the self wants. It would fulfill the wishes. But because there's no self, form cannot do what you want it to do. It cannot be what you want it to do. You're always going to be dissatisfied or unhappy or in pain. It cannot fulfill your wishes. So therefore, it is selfless. So then there is the cause, the four characteristics of the truth of origin are cause, origin, production, and condition. So cause here means because this is something that's going to come. The coming, because it will be coming, it is the cause. Because it is arising, the origin. Remember here the word origin in this context refers to what something is specifically arising out of. From this is the arising, then it's the origin. Because it is increases, it is production. So it's like things coming together and increasing, that's production. And because it depends upon them, there are conditions. So it's dependent upon the conditions. The Sanskrit word here is another one that's translated very literally in Tibetan. So if you look at the Tibetan here, Sosodrongwa, it's a little bit different than the Sanskrit Prati Sarana. At any rate, what it really means is that it depends upon conditions. So therefore, it's conditions. Since there are no more connections, or there's no connections, so the connections have perished, so it is cessation. In other words, the connections of one suffering leading to the next has been broken. There's no more, it's not going to connect to any more suffering, so it is cessation. Because it is free of the three characteristics of the composite, then it is peace. So the three characteristics of their composite are what? They are arising, staying, and perishing. So those are the three characteristics, as we spoke about in the third chapter. These characteristics are not there. Sometimes we talk about a fourth, but three here. It's free of these three, of arising, staying, and perishing. So it is peace. Because it is virtuous, it is sublime. And because it is the supreme among things that you can trust, it is emancipation. It's stable. You can trust it. You can have confidence in it. When you have achieved cessation, you are in cessation. You don't need to worry about anything else. You have achieved cessation. You can trust it. So those are the four of so that is the emancipation. So that is the four aspects of the truth of cessation. And then for the four aspects of the truth of path. Because it is incompatible with the bad paths, it is the path. In other words, there are lots of paths we could take, but there is one path, the path of the Four Noble Truths, that takes us to nirvana. So it is the incompatible with the bad paths or the wrong paths. So it is the path. Because it is incompatible with the illogical, it is reasoning or logical. Because it is not incompatible, because it is not exclusive of arriving at the city of nirvana. It is accomplishing. It doesn't prevent you from going there. All the other paths kind of keep you from there, hinder you. So there's kind of a little bit of a distinction between the previous, like the first one, the first two are kind of incompatible with impediments. And this one is saying that it's not an impediment, and therefore it is accomplishing. Because it is the antidote for all of existence, it is deliverance. It is that which delivers you to emancipation. So those are another explanation of the 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths. So it's really important for us actually to think about these 16 aspects and to really keep them in mind, and to remember, especially the ones that come up most frequently in the in the different texts are the ones on suffering. And it's kind of important for us to think about that, because if you don't know suffering, it's hard to develop the renunciation, to recognize the causes, and then to manifest cessation and to meditate on the path. So we have to really know suffering. So these are really frequently mentioned, to really think about, what do we mean when we say that things are impermanent? They're produced by conditions. They're produced by conditions, so they arise. And they arise and they perish in every single instant. There's that subtle impermanence that's keeping going. And that subtle impermanence is what? That is the suffering, the pervasive suffering of formation. That's what it is. And so it's important to keep that, thinking about that. It is not forever. Therefore, it is impermanence. Suffering is because it's like a load, it's like a burden. Or it is what harms you. You've got to think about that. Keep it, recognize that actually all of the defiled aggregates, basically everything that we experience on a day-to-day basis, is harmful. It is harmful in the sense of being a cause of pain, a potential cause of pain, or a potential cause of the feeling of pain, or the cause of future pain, as in the pain of the suffering of change. Or it's actually just by its very nature of being impermanent, it is the suffering, the pervasive suffering of formation. So recognizing that is really important. Recognizing it's selfless, that it is empty. It's like there's no little ghost in there who can say, this is me. So it's empty of that. There's nothing there that we can say is that ghost. And there's no selfless. There's there's nothing about it you can say is a me. It's neither mine. You look at the aggregates, how can you really say? And of course, on a relative level, we have to say, yeah, I'm going to, what do you say? I have to take care of my body. We're talking about our physical aggregates. We have to take care of our bodies. Because if we don't take care of our bodies, we're going to die, and then we won't be able to practice. Well, who knows where we're going to be reborn next? We have to take care of them, right? To a certain degree. Usually less of a degree than we actually do. But we have to understand these four aggregates. You have to think about, then you can think about each of these four aspects of each of these truths. It's really important to go through and kind of not just leave this as words in a book. So this is like, I think, when, of course, before we began this chapter, and of course before I began looking at it, so, the Tibetans always kind of, doesn't really apply to our practice, so we kind of rush through this chapter, and yeah, we do. But there are parts of this chapter that we really have to take a look at, and this is one of them. These four aspects of each of the four noble truths. If we're going to practice, you might think to yourselves, well, when we practice in the Mahayana, we primarily talk about the relative and the ultimate. But if you don't understand the four noble truths, how are you going to understand the relative and the ultimate? In fact, when we talk in the scholastic tradition, when we talk about the four noble truths, or about the two truths, we often talk about, well, which of the four truths are relative, which of the four truths are ultimate. And there's debate about it. How does it work? Is the path relative or ultimate? So it's important for us to understand this. It's the basis of all Buddhism. It's the first sermon that the Buddha taught. The first thing he taught was what? It's the four noble truths. So we have to understand them if we're going to get anywhere in our practice. We have to develop the intellectual understanding that, getting and listening and hearing it and thinking about it and listening to these 16 aspects, I think, gives us a better idea of what we're talking about when it's saying suffering. And there are the alternate presentations that I gave you. And unfortunately, I don't know if that's translated into English in anywhere. So, of course, the good thing is that we have this all recorded on YouTube, so you can rewind the video and listen to it again if you really want to know. But, it's thinking about the different aspects and understanding. By understanding these aspects, then you can come to a better understanding of the truth of the Four Noble Truths. That's still an understanding. In other words, this is the prajna that we achieve through listening. Then we have to think about it. We have to contemplate it. And contemplating it doesn't necessarily mean just sitting here and going, okay, I'm going to do analytic meditation on the 16 aspects. Fine. I'm going to practice the 4 foundations of mindfulness. Excellent. But you can also do this in your daily life. You can go around, you can look, and you can see, how are things? When you see how things happen, you can look at the causal things. There's a cause, something way back. There is the origin, what it actually comes out of. There's the production, kind of that sequence of one thing leading to the next. And there is there are the conditions, all the many different things that come together to make it happen. So you can look and see. And understanding that, then you'll understand these, just as this happens for a flower, it also happens for suffering. Just as you can prevent a flower from happening by cutting the shoot before it flowers, by interrupting the conditions, we can prevent suffering. By interrupting all the conditions of craving, especially craving, then we can interrupt the cycle of suffering. So understanding this, so you have to think about it and apply it. Look at things around you, then apply them as analogies to the meaning. And this is what we just need to do. It's kind of the basic work. That's the contemplation. Then you'll develop the prajna of contemplation, prajna born from contemplation, literally. And then once you have that, you meditate upon it. So that is the process. So it's kind of like a 3-step process to really thinking about it. Because what we need to do with the 4 Noble Truths is we have to internalize them, in the sense that we have to change the way we look at things. Instead of seeing things as enduring, to seeing that they are impermanent. They depend upon conditions. And how do those conditions work? Well, that's the 4 aspects of the truth of the origin. So looking at this, saying, what is it that can free us from that? Well, it's the path. And what is the result of that? The cessation. So thinking about them and really understanding them is a very important aspect for us, no matter which level of Buddhist practice we're doing. This is, you look at it, you read the words, oh, because the 3 fires of greed, hatred, and delusion are pacified, it's peace. And it's easy to say the words. Well, what does it actually mean? What does it, you have to think about it and really understand it and really incorporate it into your being. And that is very important, especially for those 4 of the truth of suffering. When you understand the 4 of the truth of suffering from the perspective of the Great Exposition, then if you're practicing the Mahayana, you have a much firmer basis to develop compassion. Because how do we understand compassion? It's by understanding the suffering in our own beings. And when you understand the suffering in your own beings and how intolerable it is for you, then you feel like it must be intolerable for everyone else. And what happens then? Then you develop the wish to, there's just no choice but to do whatever I can. Of course, you substitute your own I, but what can I do to free all sentient beings? I can't bear my own suffering. When I think of what's happening in this lifetime and potentially in the future, how can I bear that? How can other sentient beings bear it either? So that is really important, to really take these basic teachings as our basis, because without them we can't develop the Mahayana. Without the Mahayana we have no hope of practicing Vajrayana. So, well, we better get through a little bit more of the text, but that was an important passage to go through. It's, I said that I was going to blow through this chapter, but I think I'm actually going to go through this chapter quickly, but actually in the end, I think I might be spending more time on it. Where are we? Oh, which one am I sharing? Stop. I don't know what I'm sharing anymore. There's a question that I will address at the end of the class. So this is the one that I want to share. Where is it? Okay, the essence of the aspect. So this is what I was speaking at the very beginning of the talk, the question of what is an aspect. So here, according to the Great Exposition, it says the topic at the bottom of the page says, an aspect is full knowing. In other words, it's prajna. An aspect is prajna. So what do we mean by that? Well, what is a so-called aspect itself, you say? The Sutra school posits that an aspect is conditioned's manner of perception. But the Great Exposition proposes that an aspect is full knowing. In other words, you see things in a particular way. The prajna focuses on the object, it perceives them or apprehends them as impermanent, empty, selfless, and so forth. And so that is the aspect, that prajna. Now, the Sutra school would debate this and say, well, if prajna, if it's a mental factor, so if prajna is the aspect, then, well, what about the things that's concurrent with the other mental factors? How do they relate? Are they not asked? Do they perceive it directly? How do they apprehend the object directly? How does it work? And so they say it can't be that, because then the manner of apprehending objects just doesn't work, they say. So they say that it's the manner of perception itself. And and in particular, when we get to the Sutra school as presented by the Tibetans, especially, where we talk about the aspect as being like the cognitive image, that it appears in your mind. But the Great Exposition says it's this prajna. So the distinction between perceiver and perceived, or we could say the distinction between apprehender and apprehended. Perceiver and perceived is a little bit just kind of another word. I'm talking too much about words this time. Perceiver and perceived is a little bit limited. It's kind of talking about the perception, which is like sensory perception and mental perception. But this also includes mentally engaging things. We would say apprehender and apprehended. It's not as easily understood, I think. And when I was translating this, a few years ago, I wasn't being as precise in my terminology here, but it could say apprehender and apprehended instead of perceiver and perceived. So that, and that with focus can perceive. So when you're saying, what is the perceiver? That, prajna, and that with focus, that means the other mental factors and cognitions are what perceive. So you want to know what is the perceiver? It is the prajna, and then what perceives is, what is perceived is all that exists is the perceived. So this is saying that the apprehender is prajna plus the other mental factors in consciousness that have focus, and what is perceived is everything else. So then you say, well, if the aspect is prajna, the question is, so if the aspect is prajna, that means that only prajna can really apprehend, because you apprehend things through aspects, don't you? And the Great Exposition says no, because actually apprehension can happen but through anything that has a focus. So no, that full knowing, or prajna, and that with a focus, any mental factor or consciousness that has a focus can apprehend or perceive. So all that exists as knowable phenomena is what is perceived. So basically, any knowable phenomena is what what we could call the apprehended. So thus, full knowing is proposed to be all three. Or that is, prajna is proposed to be all three. It's said to be prajna and an apprehender and the apprehended. All other dharmas with focus are apprehender and apprehended, or perceiver and perceived. And all that does not have a focus, like a bed, a cup, or cessation, is only perceived or apprehended. See, this is why perceived is a little bit difficult. It's hard to perceive. Well, you must be able to perceive. Yes, you are. In the Great Exposition, you are able to perceive cessation. So I'm going to stop on that digression there. Okay, so those are the distinctions between the perceiver and perceived. Now, there are also other distinctions in the in the knowings, and so of these distinctions, there are 5 topics. Explaining the other distinctions of the knowings was 5 topics: distinctions of the essence, distinctions of their level, distinctions of their support, distinctions of the foundations of mindfulness, and the distinctions of focus. So here, to speak about the distinctions of the essence, it says, the essence here we're talking about virtuous, unvirtuous, or neutral. Which of the 3 is it? The first is threefold. Relative knowing is threefold. The others are virtue. So of the 10 knowings, the first, relative knowing, is threefold: virtuous, non-virtuous, and neutral. For example, relative knowing includes what? Well, it includes the correct worldly view. And what is that? That's virtuous. It includes personality view. And what is that? That is neutral, obscured neutral. And it excludes, and it includes wrong virtue, wrong view. And what is that? That's non-virtue. So it includes all three. Therefore, it is all three: virtue, non-virtue, and neutral. And the other 9 are virtuous only, because they're the nobles, basically the knowings the nobles have in equipoise. And the distinctions of level. And so just to remind you, when we talk about level, what are we talking about? We're talking about which level of meditation. The preparations for the dhyana, the 4 dhyanas, or the 4 formulas, which level? And when we're talking about support, we're talking about where is your body, which realm is your body in. So level means the levels of dhyana and formless, and support means the realm that your body is in. So the distinctions of level are read. The first is on all of the levels. So the relative knowing is on all of the levels. It's in desire realm. It's in the preparations for form. It's on all 4 levels of the dhyana. It's on all 4 levels of the formless realm. So it's everywhere. The one called Dharma is on 6. So Dharma knowing is on 6 levels. Dharma knowing is on 6, so it's on the 6 levels of desire, preparations for form. No, it's not desire. The preparations for form, the 4 dhyanas plus the special dhyana. The subsequent knowing is on 9. It's on the preparations for dhyana, the 4 form, the special dhyana, and the first 3 formless, and 6 likewise. The other 6 are the same. Then the knowing other minds is on 4 dhyanas. It's only on the 4 levels of the dhyanas. To give the explanation for the distinctions of the levels, the first of the knowings is on all the levels from desire to the peak of existence. That is, relative knowing is on all levels. That's easy to understand, because you can have no relative knowing on any level. One called Dharma knowing is only on the 6 levels of dhyana. Preparations for the undefiled preparations for the first dhyana, the 4 actual dhyanas plus the special dhyanas. As that is the antidote for the desire in particular, it is not on the formless levels. So the reason it is not on the formless levels is because in order to act as the antidote for desire, it has to actually focus on the things of desire realm. But the formless is too far away, so it can't be on the levels of the formless. The subsequent knowing is on any of the 9 undefiled levels. So the 9 undefiled levels are the, what do we say? The undefiled preparations for the first dhyana, 4 dhyana, special dhyana, first 3 levels of formless, the first 3 formless absorptions. The portion of 6, that is, knowing the 4 truths, knowing extinction and non-arising, that is included within subsequent knowing is likewise on 9. So you've got the 4, the knowing the suffering, origin, selfless, and suffering, origin, cessation, and path, and then knowing extinction and knowing non-arising. These 6, if they can either be Dharma knowing or subsequent knowing, and so therefore they can also be on 9, like the subsequent knowing. The portion that is included within Dharma knowing is on 6 levels, because basically when you have these 6, they're just different ways of slicing up the categories of undefiled knowings. Knowing others' minds, that is telepathy, is difficult to produce, so it is only on the easy paths of the actual practices of the 4, so only the easy paths of the 4 dhyanas can support it, because it just takes too much work. So if you're on the preparations for dhyana, it's just, you're working hard to produce dhyana, so you can't also work hard and then do a second. You've got too much work to do, so you can't do it. Okay. That we'll go through just a little bit more. We'll go through the support, since I mentioned that. So that has desire and form as support, and dhyana has support, dharma has support of desire. The other is on 3 realm support. So to read the commentary, what supports are they on? So where is your body when you're meditating on them? That is telepathy, is supported only by the dhyanas. So it definitely has desire and form as its bodily support. So it can't be in the formless, because because when you're in the formless realm, you're not meditating on the dhyanas. So it's in desire and form. And dharma knowing, as it is primarily weariness with desire, has the support of desire only. So The higher two realms are, if you're in the higher two realms, you are detached from desire. So they're no longer weary of it. So once you have achieved form realm, it's like, I'm free of desire. I don't need to think about it anymore. Bye-bye. I can't be weary with you. I'm not even going to think about you anymore. Ha, I'm free. The 8 other knowings, then those 2 have any of the 3 realms as support. So the 8 other knowings can be on form, formless, and desire. So that is enough of that for right now. And there are a few questions that came up. Okay. So the question is, the first question is, can you say a little bit more about empty and selfless in this context, please? Not sure I understand the difference. Absence of me and absence of mind is just a shift in perspective. So when we're talking about the aggregates, you can either see them as being me or as being mine, or as being a support for me, or as being the place where I am. These are kind of 4 different ways that you can look at the aggregates. And you might think to yourself, well, of course the body isn't me, but there's someone inside, the little ghost in the machine that owns them. And so that is kind of what we're counteracting with empty, that kind of mine. And then selfless is like when you're saying, well, the 5 aggregates are me. It's like thinking that the form, feeling, conception, formation, and consciousness, you might think that one or all of these is me, or the combination is me. And then you look at them, you see that it's not. That's saying the selfless. So they're slightly different. Of course, you can say, yeah, they're sort of similar. They are similar. They're both kind of different ways of looking at personality view. And personality view can look at the aggregates as seeing them as being mine, or as my support, the place, or as being me, any of the 5 aggregates. So there's just, they're very similar. But the difference between me and mine is a little bit different, because when you're saying mine, then there has to be a me that can own, right? When you say my watch, my glasses, these are my glasses. What are they? Who's the me who owns them? So by understanding that there's no mind, you can actually also, it's sometimes actually an easier way to understand selflessness. Trungpa Rinpoche has said occasionally in the past, it's an easier way to understand selflessness if you understand that there is no mind. He always uses the example of a Rolex. You go into the store, the Rolex store. You're standing there, and someone drops a Rolex on the ground, and it shatters, destroyed. Are you upset? No. You might even be amused. I remember that time we went to the Rolex store and they broke the watch. But when it is your Rolex and you know how much it's going to cost to repair the thing, and your Rolex falls on the concrete floor and bursts into a bunch of pieces, you're totally upset. Why is that? It's because, one, we attach the idea of me. Is there any difference between the Rolexes? The one in the store and the one that you thought of as yours? They're both the same in being Rolexes. They're both nice. I mean, maybe one has more diamonds. I don't know. The one that falls, that's yours, that falls on the ground, and on the ground, and the diamonds then are broken off and fall down the sewer pipe. Then you're really upset, right? But there's nothing about that that's actually mine. And when you understand that, then you realize there's nothing that can actually be a me either. So it's just a slightly different. They're very similar, but they're slightly different. I think if you think about it, there's nothing about what makes the aggregates mine. Is there anything that's, it's just a lump of flesh for the body. It's just mind and mental factors. What makes them mine? That's an important one. I think just think about it and you'll come to understand. It's a very maybe get some understanding. Maybe it's harder to understand, and maybe that's why I'm not able to really, this is probably a sign that I haven't actually internalized the difference between me and mine. It's a subtle one. So I guess we all have to contemplate it more. So then the two more questions. There's this next question reads, why is it that the three fires are called fires? And yet when we make progress and dream of three great fires burning everything, then this is said to be auspicious. Well, this is actually just using fire as an analogy. And when you use an analogy, you can use the same thing as a comparison for multiple different things. So when you talk about fires, the three fires of greed, hatred, and delusion, then we're talking about it as like being painful. Because when you're in the middle of that fire of greed, hatred, and delusion, it is painful, right? So that's taking that quality of fire as being painful. And when you're thinking about burning up the great fire that burns up all the afflictions, that's saying that it kind of consumes everything bad. You're kind of cleaning everything. It's got that cleansing aspect, and that's another analogy. And then the last question is, why do we learn of formless realm? We will forget it after death? Well, we hope that you aren't. The main reason for learning about, there are a couple of reasons for learning about the formless realm. The first is to understand basically what are the different places we could be reborn, and what are the benefits about them. And also to understand the natures of our, what do we say? Because when we talk about the formless realm, to understand the natures of the meditations that we can. We've got the dhyanas and the formless meditations, we need to understand what they are, what they can lead to. And in particularly, and so that's the main reason for understanding it, is because it's a place that we can end up in samsara, that we might mistake for being a pleasant place, when actually it is by nature suffering. So by understanding its nature, then we can feel revulsion for the entirety of samsara, as opposed to ending up in a blank state and thinking we've made it. So that is all the questions. There are other comments, but I think that they're not so much questions for the moment. So that is enough for today. We will continue tomorrow. One announcement. Next week, Wednesday, is the 4th day of the 6th Tibetan month, which is the anniversary of the Buddha first turning the wheel of Dharma. It is also Bastille Day for everyone in France. But we will not have class on that day, because we are celebrating not Bastille Day, but here in Vancouver, we're celebrating the anniversary of the Buddha turning the wheel of Dharma. And so here we will be having a day-long ceremony where we're going to read the Sutra of the Fortunate Eon. It's a long Mahayana Sutra. And as a result, we will be reading sutras all day long, and we will not have a class. Here we will be reading sutras all day long, so I will not be able to teach you a class. I would encourage you all. I don't know if we're going to, usually we kind of broadcast, do a webcast of these things on Facebook. It's not going to be the most exciting watching, but if you want to join, you're more than welcome. And of course, you can also spend the time reading sutras on your own. So next Wednesday, the 14th, we will not have class. So now let's please dedicate the virtue of listening to and contemplating and teaching the Dharma to the benefit of all sentient beings, so that they may be swiftly freed from all of the 4 great rivers of suffering, of birth, aging, sickness, and death, and so that they may be swiftly brought to the state of omniscience, the state of Buddhahood. Osanam de tam je se pani tobne nye pedranam pamchete kegana chi balong chobai sipe toledro kunyorosho. By this merit may we attain omniscience, defeat the enemy, wrongdoing, and free all beings swiftly from the ocean of existence, churned by great waves of birth, age, sickness, and death. Chanchup senjo rinpoche make panam ye jureji jeba nyamba meba liang gongne gongdu pelwar sho. May bodhicitta, great and precious, arise in those who have not roused it, never weakening in those who have. May it grow ever stronger and stronger. So, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.